In a quiet suburban neighborhood, a charming man introduced himself as Dr. Victor Hanover, a world-class brain surgeon who had traveled the globe saving lives. He wore a crisp white coat, drove an expensive car, and told stories that dazzled everyone he met. But behind that winning smile was a darkness so chilling, it would leave an entire town questioning everything they thought they knew about him. Because the truth was buried just beneath his perfectly manicured backyard. Before we uncover the shocking secrets hidden behind the walls of Victor Hanover's life, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to True Crime Stories Arena, and turn on notifications. We bring you the most gripping, real-life crime stories every day, stories that stay with you long after the screen fades to black. Let's dive in. They say charm can open doors, but in the quiet town of Willow Creek, charm didn't just open doors, it tore down walls. And no one wielded it better than Victor Hanover. He arrived in late spring, when the streets were blooming with dogwoods and the air carried the kind of stillness only small towns know. He wasn't flashy, but he didn't need to be. A dark suit, a foreign accent, and eyes that seemed to size up a room in one sweep. Victor introduced himself modestly as a neurosurgeon, recently relocated from a prestigious hospital somewhere in Vienna or Zurich, depending on who asked. The house he bought sat on the edge of Ridgewood Drive, a colonial with white shutters and a manicured lawn that hadn't seen such attention in decades. Neighbors watched him from behind curtains, whispering like schoolchildren. Who was this man, and what had brought him to Willow Creek? It didn't take long for curiosity to turn into admiration. Victor wasn't just polite, he was magnetic. He threw backyard barbecues so elegant they felt like catered galas. Local children splashed in his heated pool while their parents sipped imported wines and listened to him speak about brain surgery with a quiet confidence that demanded no validation. He donated tens of thousands to the local hospital, the same hospital whose budget had been hanging by a thread. A new wing bore his name. Hanover Pavilion. Nurses smiled when he walked by. Doctors nodded in deference. He offered free consultations to elderly neighbors, soft-spoken reassurances that their tremors were likely benign, or that their memory lapses didn't appear to be the early signs of dementia. But of course, he would say with a slight bow, you should follow up with your primary care provider. In just 6 months, Victor had become more than just a man, he was a myth. A European surgeon turned small-town benefactor. A symbol of class, generosity, and brilliance. By winter, the town's Chamber of Commerce had named him Man of the Year. But behind every perfect story, there's a wrinkle. It started small. A dinner party at the local mayor's house. A guest, a retired general surgeon, asked Victor about a rare spinal procedure. Victor smiled, but his explanation didn't quite make sense. The terminology felt off, like someone describing a painting they'd only seen in a book. At first, no one thought much of it. The man had probably misspoken. Or maybe it was a translation issue. After all, English wasn't his first language. But then came other moments. Someone asked which hospital he trained at in Zurich. Victor gave a name that didn't quite align with the city's medical system. Another time, a nurse who worked in the ER asked him casually about a new neurosurgical tool making headlines. Victor seemed unfamiliar, even dismissive. And when people tried to get closer, really closer, to understand the man behind the myth, he'd change the subject. Laugh. Offer another round of wine. Tell a charming story about treating a famous European pianist. He was just so smooth, so practiced, that doubts often died before they took root. Most people chose to believe him. After all, what harm is there in a little mystery? But a few in Willow Creek started to wonder, who was Victor Hanover, really? And what was he hiding beneath that flawless smile? The illusion of perfection is delicate. In Willow Creek, the myth of Victor Hanover remained intact, until a girl named Mia Cartwright vanished into the night. She was 24, local, bright. A part-time waitress at the Red Lantern Diner and a freelance photographer on weekends. She wasn't a stranger to Victor. In fact, she'd been at his last backyard party, one of those warm, wine-soaked evenings that blurred into midnight under fairy lights and soft jazz. Mia had been invited to photograph the event. She took candid shots of families laughing, children playing, and Victor himself, glass of Merlot in hand, surrounded by admirers. She never made it home that night. At first, it didn't trigger alarm. Mia was young, independent, the kind of spirit that sometimes drifted without notice. Her mother assumed she was staying with friends. Her roommate thought she'd gone on a spontaneous trip. But by the second day, silence turned into concern. Text messages went unanswered. Her phone, pinged by local authorities, had last connected to a tower not far from Ridgewood Drive. Whispers stirred. Victor, ever the community man, didn't shy away. He joined search efforts. Coordinated volunteers. Passed out flyers with Mia's photo. He even allowed law enforcement to canvass his property, no search warrant, just a gentleman with nothing to hide. To many, it was a noble gesture. But to others, it felt like a performance. Then came the neighbor. Janet Weller had lived 2 doors down from Victor for over a decade. One morning, while walking her terrier near the edge of Victor's expansive property, she caught an odor. Something sharp and rotten, clinging to the air like smoke. She followed the scent to a corner of the fence where the soil looked different, dark, recently turned, and clumsily covered with pine needles and mulch. A patch of the earth sagged unnaturally, and flies buzzed in erratic circles. Janet called the police. By the time officers arrived, Victor was already outside, watering his lawn, as if nothing was out of place. He greeted the officers calmly. No stutter, no twitch. Just the same courteous smile and soft baritone voice. "You're welcome to take a look," he said, gesturing to the back gate. "I heard about the smell too. Figured it was a dead animal. They brought in cadaver dogs." Within an hour, the mood shifted. What began as a welfare check now looked like something else entirely. The ground was broken open, piece by piece, until the shovel hit plastic. Thick, industrial grade. Beneath it, layers of burlap, tarp, and a human arm. The crime scene was sealed within minutes. Victor remained still as detectives questioned him. His answers were measured, clinical. No signs of panic. If anything, he appeared rehearsed. He told them Mia had attended the party, yes. She'd left around 10 p.m., he claimed, with another guest, a man he couldn't name. "I hardly knew her," he added. "She was hired to take photos. That's all." But as officers examined the backyard, inconsistencies emerged. The cameras Mia had brought were missing. So was the guest list. Neighbors mentioned seeing Mia speaking privately with Victor near the patio, long after most guests had left. One even recalled loud voices, an argument, muffled by distance. But no one had thought to report it, until now. Victor's story began to splinter. Investigators reviewed his credentials again. The hospital in Zurich he'd claimed to work at. No record. The medical license he provided. Suspiciously pristine, and filed under a slightly different name. Authorities dug deeper. As Victor sat in his living room, sipping coffee and answering each question like it was just another town hall meeting, the world outside was beginning to unravel. And Mia Cartwright was only the beginning. What exactly had Victor brought with him to Willow Creek? And how many lies had they already accepted as truth? When darkness falls on Willow Creek, the town usually sleeps peacefully. But not that night. Floodlights tore through Victor Hanover's backyard like knives through silk. Police officers, crime scene investigators, and forensic specialists in sterile suits combed every inch of his carefully tended garden. What had once been the pride of Ridgewood Drive, the lush rose beds, the pristine hedges, was now a battlefield of truth versus appearances. Earlier that evening, a judge had signed a search warrant, citing probable cause. What had begun as whispers was now a full-throated roar of suspicion. Neighbors gathered behind police tape, clutching coats tighter against the chill, exchanging murmured fears. Some refused to believe it. Others claimed they'd always known something wasn't right. As the digging deepened beneath the rose garden, the scent of decay grew stronger. Shovels struck something unnatural, thick plastic sheeting, heavy and waterlogged. Silence fell as officers stepped back, faces pale beneath their visors. Within minutes, the grisly discovery was confirmed: human remains. Not just scattered bones, but a body, carefully wrapped, preserved in the suffocating embrace of plastic, hidden beneath layers of manicured soil and blooming roses. The forensic team worked methodically. Every movement was documented. Photographs, samples, soil cores. No mistake could be made, not here, not now. Back inside the house, Victor Hanover watched through a window. When detectives entered, he didn't run. He didn't shout. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He simply placed his hands calmly behind his back as the cuffs clicked shut. On the ride to the station, Victor spoke very little. Only once, when an officer read him his rights, did he respond, with a slight smile, almost amused, and a chilling phrase that would later be quoted on national news. I have no idea how that got there. At the precinct, his mugshot was taken. He stood straight, unbothered. A faint, confident smile crossed his lips, the same smile that had once charmed an entire town. News spread like wildfire. By morning, Victor Hanover's name was on every television screen, every news ticker, every whisper in the grocery store aisles. The European neurosurgeon, the community hero, the man everyone thought they knew, now accused of unthinkable horror. Authorities launched a deeper investigation into his past. Records were pulled. Interpol was contacted. Questions arose not just about Mia Cartwright, but about whether Victor had done this before. Whether Willow Creek was just the latest chapter in a far darker story. For now, the town could only wait and wonder. Who had they welcomed with open arms? And how many more secrets were still buried behind closed doors? It didn't take long for the truth to surface. Victor Hanover, the celebrated neurosurgeon, the generous neighbor, the pride of Willow Creek, was a lie. His real name was Marcus Dyer. A failed medical student from a modest town hundreds of miles away. A man with a long, tangled history of deception, stretching back more than a decade. Investigators uncovered the truth the way one pulls thread from a frayed sweater, slowly at first, then all at once. His supposed credentials from a prestigious European hospital. Fabricated. The glowing references he'd shared with the town council. Forged documents printed on aged paper. Even the medical jargon he casually dropped at barbecues was stitched together from internet articles and half-remembered lectures he once attended before flunking out of a second-rate medical college. Marcus Dyer had never held a scalpel in a professional setting. He had never set foot inside a surgery room as a doctor. What he had held was a long-standing grudge, against a world that he felt owed him more than he ever earned. Court records revealed that Marcus had been arrested twice before, once for credit card fraud, another time for attempting to steal a physician's identity. Each time, he slipped through the cracks. Misdemeanors, light sentencing, relocation. A shapeshifter moving from place to place, reinventing himself just enough to fool the next town, the next circle of unsuspecting believers. The deeper authorities dug, the darker the picture became. Victor, or rather, Marcus, wasn't just an imposter. He was a predator. Detectives working the Cartwright case began coordinating with police departments in other states. A pattern emerged, eerily consistent, chillingly methodical. In 3 different towns, spread over 7 years, Marcus had posed as a doctor. Always moving into small, tightly knit communities. Always establishing trust quickly, wrapping himself in respectability. And always, vanishing just as a young, vulnerable woman disappeared. The first was in Rosefield, Missouri. A 19-year-old nursing assistant named Emily Hartford vanished after attending a charity gala where Marcus had been an honored guest. At the time, there was no connection made. Emily was written off as a runaway. The second was in Glen Harbor, Maine. 23-year-old Sarah Pennington disappeared 2 days after Marcus, then going by Dr. Victor Hess, hosted a medical lecture at the town library. Again, no hard evidence tied him to the case. Sarah's car was found abandoned by the cliffs, authorities suspected suicide. The third disappearance was in Dalton Springs, Arizona. Megan Ruiz, 21 years old, was last seen speaking with Dr. Hanover outside a local clinic where he'd been volunteering. She, too, was reported missing. Her case went cold within months. Now, with Mia Cartwright's body found buried in his backyard, those unsolved disappearances were reopened. And Marcus Dyer, the man once adored for his charm and generosity, became the prime suspect. Families of the missing women were interviewed. One after another, the stories echoed the same tragic notes. A mentor figure. A trusted advisor. Someone who offered opportunities, guidance, a listening ear. Someone who made them feel seen, special, and then disappeared along with them. Mothers wept on television screens. Fathers clenched fists of impotent rage. Friends recalled uneasy feelings, strange conversations, but dismissed them at the time. Because who would suspect a man so respected, so admired, so trusted? In Willow Creek, shock turned to anger. People who had stood beside Victor at fundraising dinners now deleted their social media posts. Those who had received medical advice from him burned the letters, threw away the photographs. No one wanted to remember how easily they'd been deceived. The town's Man of the Year trophy was removed from its display at City Hall. The local newspaper published a front-page editorial titled simply, "We believed him." Behind bars, Marcus Dyer remained silent. No confessions. No remorse. His lawyers issued generic statements about misunderstandings and presumption of innocence, but few in Willow Creek, and beyond, believed them. Forensic teams continued to search his properties, storage units, and rental spaces across 3 states. Each discovery hinted at more layers of deceit, more women targeted, more lives forever changed by a man who wore kindness like a mask. The tragedy of it all wasn't just in the lives lost. It was in the trust betrayed. The faith shattered. Marcus Dyer had built a life out of lies, and now, every brick of that false empire was crumbling under the weight of the truth. But the question remained. How many more victims were still out there, their stories waiting to be uncovered beneath the carefully cultivated surface of a man who almost got away with everything? The trial of Marcus Dyer was unlike anything Willow Creek, or the nation, had ever seen. National media descended on the quiet town, turning the county courthouse into a stage for the ultimate drama, deception, betrayal, and cold-blooded murder. Inside the packed courtroom, Marcus sat at the defense table, neatly dressed, calm, the faint smirk never far from his lips. It was the same smirk he wore the night of his arrest, as if this were all just another performance. He entered a plea of not guilty to all charges. The defense team worked feverishly to paint a different portrait of Marcus. Not as a monster, but as a misunderstood genius. An eccentric man whose peculiarities had been misinterpreted. They argued that he had suffered from untreated psychological issues, a brilliant mind burdened by the crushing weight of societal expectations. He is not a killer, one defense attorney declared. He is a lonely man who created a fantasy life to be accepted. A man guilty of lies, but not of murder. The prosecution wasted no time dismantling that narrative. They presented a mountain of evidence, each piece heavier and more damning than the last. First, the DNA. Samples recovered from the remains buried beneath Victor's rose garden were conclusively matched to Mia Cartwright. Fibers from the plastic sheeting bore traces of Marcus's fingerprints. Blood found beneath the floorboards of his guest house, traces too faint to see without forensic testing, matched 2 other missing women linked to him. Then came the surveillance footage. A grainy but chilling video from a neighbor's home security camera showed Marcus leading Mia, visibly intoxicated and disoriented, into his backyard late on the night she vanished. She was never seen leaving. The final blow came in the form of Marcus's personal journals, recovered from a storage unit registered under one of his many false identities. In meticulous, chilling detail, Marcus had cataloged what he called potential subjects, young women he had met, observed, and evaluated for trustworthiness and compliance. Pages of notes outlined how he gained their trust, isolated them, manipulated their fears and dreams. In one entry, dated just days before Mia's disappearance, Marcus had written, "Mia C. shows promise. Nervous but adoring. Must be careful. Must be swift." The courtroom grew colder with every reading. But it was the testimony of Mia Cartwright's family that pierced even the hardest hearts. Mia's mother, pale and shaking, took the stand and clutched a letter Mia had written just 3 days before she disappeared. Her voice broke as she read it aloud. In the letter, Mia confided her growing discomfort around Victor Hanover. She wrote about how honored she had been to receive mentorship from someone so important, but how something about him felt off lately, how his compliments had turned invasive, his attention too intense. Sometimes, Mia had written, "He looks at me like I'm something he already owns." The letter ended with a chilling line. "I don't know why, but I'm scared to tell anyone. What if no one believes me?" There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. The prosecution rested its case, letting the letter's haunting words echo in the minds of the jury. Marcus never took the stand in his own defense. His attorneys advised against it. The risk was too high. His charm, once his greatest weapon, now reeked of manipulation in the eyes of the public. Closing arguments painted a stark contrast. The defense urged the jury to separate fact from emotion, to not let sympathy cloud their judgment. The prosecution, however, told the jury plainly, "This is not about a man's eccentricities. This is about a predator who cloaked himself in goodness, hunted the vulnerable, and buried the evidence beneath his lies." The fate of Marcus Dyer was now in the hands of 12 men and women. Outside, Willow Creek held its breath. The trial had revealed not just the darkness inside one man, but the vulnerabilities within every small town, a reminder of how easily trust can be weaponized, how easily a mask can fool even the most careful eyes. And as the jury retired to deliberate, one truth had already been cemented in the hearts of the people. Marcus Dyer's lies had cost them more than just innocence. It had cost them lives. The weight was excruciating. For 2 days, the jury pored over every shred of evidence, every testimony, every chilling detail of the case that had gripped Willow Creek and the nation. When they finally returned to the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Reporters jostled for position. Families of the victims sat in silence, holding hands tightly, bracing for the words they had longed, and feared, to hear. The foreman stood, voice steady. On the charge of first-degree murder, guilty. On the multiple counts of fraud and identity theft, guilty. Marcus Dyer showed no emotion as the verdicts were read. No remorse, no anger. Only the same unsettling calm that had followed him since the moment he set foot in Willow Creek. The judge delivered the sentence without hesitation. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. There would be no second chances, no future deceptions. For Marcus Dyer, the curtain had finally fallen. But for Willow Creek, the scars would take far longer to heal. Marcus's former home, once the site of glittering backyard parties and whispered admiration, was reduced to rubble. The townspeople refused to let the shadow of his crimes linger over their lives. In its place, they built something new, a memorial park, small but striking. At its center, a simple stone monument inscribed with a single phrase. Truth always finds its way to the surface. Every year, on the anniversary of the verdict, residents gather at the park to honor Mia Cartwright and the other young women whose lives were stolen. It's not just an act of remembrance. It's a promise, to each other, and to themselves, that trust must be earned, that evil often wears a smiling face, and that no matter how carefully darkness is hidden, it cannot escape the light forever. In the end, Willow Creek did not forget. It chose to remember, and to rebuild. Stronger. Wiser. Unbreakable. He promised to heal lives. Instead, he destroyed them. Behind every lie he told was another life taken, another family shattered. Marcus Dyer taught an entire town a brutal lesson: appearances deceive, and sometimes, the most trusted faces hide the darkest secrets. Please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to True Crime Stories Arena, and turn on notifications, as we bring you the most gripping, real-life crime stories every day.